Hello and welcome back to Pics and Portraits. By capturing movement, film reflects the rhythm of life perhaps better than any other medium. We project our experience onto the screen, and since its inception have continued to refine it with the addition of sound and then color. Both began as novelties that eventually became standard, but the next step, immersion into the image, 3D, did not fare as well. Throughout film history, many attempts have been made to popularize 3D movies, but it never really seems to catch on. Today, we're going to look at why that might be, as well as take a trip through the so-called golden age of 3D, the early 1950s. Well, it took until the 1950s to gain popularity, and may surprise you to learn 3D film is nearly as old as the medium itself. Its roots are in the early stereoscopic experiments of William Friese-Greene. Friese-Greene would project two films and have the viewer watch them through what's known as a stereoscope. Now, to understand why or how 3D works, we need to know a little bit about the eye and how it functions. Bear in mind, I am no expert, but our eyes act as cameras, capturing information for our brain to process. Our brain then decides, among other things, how far away that object is and what space it occupies. Stereoscopic photography tricks your brain by presenting two offset images to each of your eyes, creating the illusion of depth. At least, that's how your brain interprets it. This effect is achieved through the use of a device, such as a stereoscope or the classic red cyan anaglyphic glasses. Most early 3D relied on the latter. Basically, red and cyan filters were placed over each of the projected images, and when viewed through the glasses, the eyes focused on the corresponding color. If this sounds complicated, it is. 3D film went through many experiments before being embraced by Hollywood. I would love to show you more, but like many early films, the results of these experiments no longer exist. We do have some examples, and although a few may work with those glasses, most of what we will see is presented 2D or flat. First up, we have 1935's Audioscoptics. Now, this was a series of tests produced for MGM by Jacob Leventhal and John Noring. They showcased 3D through several different actions, including a game of baseball and a ride on a roller coaster, which is probably the most famous. Another early test that was screened to the public was In Tune with Tomorrow, also known as New Dimensions. This was a short film produced by Chrysler for the 1939 World's Fair, definitely a well-trodden topic on this channel. It featured a Chrysler Plymouth being assembled on its own, with various components dancing and coming out at the audience. It's very cute, very charming. But let's jump ahead to the early 1950s. After half a century, the spectacle of film had faded, and the advent of television brought more options for home entertainment. People can now consume visual media without going to a movie theater, and the industry had to distinguish itself and offer a more unique experience. Studios believed people wanted realism. We hear sounds, and we see in color, but we also see depth. So the next logical step was 3D film. While it had existed for decades, 3D was still largely a novelty, as we've seen, and audiences had to be taught how to view it. Produced by animator Bob Clampett, M.L. Gunsberg Presents 3D was a short film created as a means of doing so, but also to ensure them that the process was safe. It screened before the first 3D feature film, Arch Oboler's independently produced Bwana Devil in 1952. Marketed as Natural Vision, Bwana Devil was critically panned but absolutely adored by audiences. Its success led to 1953's House of Wax, starring Vincent Price, and Man in the Dark, produced by Warner Brothers and Columbia respectively. This was 3D's mainstream breakthrough. That same year, Universal entered the fray with It Came from Outer Space. 1953 also brought Paramount's first foray into 3D, Sangaree, and Fox's Inferno. Needless to say, it was a big year, and I'm sure you're starting to notice a bit of a theme. Because of the novelty of images popping out of the screen, it's no surprise many 3D films were genre films, like sci-fi, adventure, horror. These lend themselves perfectly to 3D due to the potential of shock and awe. That's not to say there were no dramas or serious movies. The most distinguished director to produce a film in 3D was probably Alfred Hitchcock, with 1954's Dial M for Murder, though it had a very complicated screening history. Early previews and screenings were so poorly received that it was immediately re-released flat. The 3D version wouldn't see the light of day until the 1980s. This was more or less the beginning of the end. Inconvenience ultimately led to 3D's demise. It required twice as much equipment and resources and asked the audience to wear an accessory in order to enjoy it. And that is, if it was even done properly, as one air was capable of disorienting the viewer and spoiling the entire experience. This happened frequently and contributed to 3D's decline. It also faced stiff competition from other emerging formats like Cinerama, which presented a massive widescreen image using 3 projectors, projecting 3 separate images to form one, or the more enduring CinemaScope, which achieved similar effect with existing technology using an anamorphic lens. A wider image won out, and by the mid-1950s, 3D was relegated back to novelty, but it would be back. A majority of the films from 3D's golden age can be filed under schlock, and as such fell into obscurity or neglect. However, in the past decade, many have been lovingly restored and converted to digital 3D by the 3D Film Archive. If you have the interest and means to view these films, I encourage you to support this company. They do an amazing job. You can support us at patreon.com/picsandportraits. We're going to be looking back at 3D's renaissance in the 1980s, as well as some of the films we glossed over here, there. You can get access to that and dozens of other videos for just $5 a month, so please consider supporting us. In case you missed it, that is also the new home of Sleepcore, though it is free, so check that out if you haven't. We should have a new one going up in the next couple weeks as well. As always, thank you so much for your interest in this channel, and thank you so much for watching.